picture. And I saw, like, if you can imagine, a horse race. And when all the horses are lined up at the gates, and all of a sudden the gates are dropped and the horses just take off. And they just took off. And then around the first bend of the track, all the horses jumped the track and just went free and wild. And I love that because it's not hard to see if you take a step back and look around what the Holy Spirit is doing. I'm talking about freedom this morning. They're singing about freedom. Women's groups, we're talking about freedom. God's doing freedom. And so Jesus, we just acknowledge what you're doing. Holy Spirit, we thank you that you're so wildly creative, that you're so good, that you have abundance and freedom for us, and that you are 110% invested in getting us to that freedom, in showing us how to access it. You didn't just dump it in a treasure pile over here and say, go find it. You said, let me walk you to it. Let me take you every step of the way. Let me give you the grace that will enable you to walk in freedom. So we thank you, Jesus. And church, just in our hearts right now, let's just prepare ourselves for freedom. Let's expect breakthrough this morning. Let's acknowledge the breakthrough that happened yesterday. So let's get really expectant this morning, not because of anything I have to say, but just because of what God is doing. Thank you, Father. It's really interesting to me because I also just had a thought as, I was seeing that picture and hearing people talk before service, hearing Helen share about things that she's seen go on in the week, seeing the worship team and everybody, and just you can just see the Holy Spirit just weaving his way through everything. And it's so cool. And it just reminded me of, a situation. This week, Kai and I have been having lots of cuddle times and stuff like that, and lots of it is led to talking about the planets and the solar system and stargazing. And, so we've been just talking lots about different things, and he's been watching some documentaries. And then yesterday morning he asked me, he was like, can we read this book about microbiomes? So for an hour, we read a book about microbiomes. And then he started relating microbiomes in your gut to solar systems. And then we're comparing it to Horton Hears a Who. And it was just so wonderful to watch his brain just follow promptings. And everything he says, every time he encounters science, he says, I can't wait to get to heaven so God can show me this. I can't wait to get to heaven so God can tell me about black holes. And so he pulls out yesterday. He says, I wonder then if we're rotating the sun. He's like, I wonder if the sun rotates anything. I'm like, well, that's a good question. Honestly, never really thought about that. And he's like, I bet it does. He says, I bet that our whole solar system is rotating around something in the Milky Way. And I'm like, good point. So we started Googling, and sure enough, scientists believe that the sun and our entire solar system is rotating around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And I just never even thought of that before. But what struck me is that we can see God all around when we're curious, when we care to see. And so even this morning, this is totally not related to what I'm going to speak about at all, but I just feel like some of us sometimes we're like, well, why don't I see pictures? Or why don't I get a word? Or why don't I see these things? And I feel God just inviting you, be curious. And he's just going to start showing himself. Be curious. All right, now to the real thing I was going to talk about. We're going to park most of the time in John 11. And I'm like all new and fancy here because my printer ran out of ink and I'm a paper girl when it comes to speaking, but I have to use my iPad. And I have my new Passion Translation Bible that a friend sent me, and it's so good, and I wanted to read from that. And just a tip, I did find the Passion Translation is now on YouVersion. So TPT is what you want to look for. Okay, so we're going to look at John 11, which is the story of Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life. Spoiler alert, sorry. Okay, he gets brought back to life, which also means he dies. So, sorry if I wrecked it for you. All right. Before that, though, in John verse 10, I just want to set the stage a little bit because just this whole run of events is really interesting. So, starting out in kind of like John 10 verse 23, we have Jesus healing a man who was blind from birth. So, he had never seen before. Right from the get-go, he was blind. And so I think this is the one, correct me if I'm wrong, where he had the mud on his eyes, and then he gets healed. And now we have a bunch of people who are like completely astounded, who are excited, and they are putting their faith in Jesus because of this, because the guy just opened this guy's eyes that have been completely blind from birth. And then we have the religious people who are ticked off. Like, they made a whole thing of it. They brought in the man's parents. This is an adult man. They brought in the man's parents to testify. Was he really blind from birth? Yes, he was. Well, how come he can see now? And they're like, they don't want to say anything because they don't want to get arrested by the Pharisees. Okay, so they're like, he's a grown man. He can talk for himself. And the guy's like, I was healed. I don't know why. I was blind, but now I see. Okay, so that kind of made me wonder, I'm like, do I ever protect my view of religion so much so that when God works, that my immediate reaction is distrust? If God does something different in somebody's life that I'm not used to seeing, do I kind of go, I don't know. Just food for thought. Okay, so then Jesus goes to the temple for the Feast of Renewal, and the leaders literally circle him. Like, they have ganged up on him. They pepper him with questions about who he is, and he's like, I'm the Son of God. And he's like, if you don't believe me, check out my actions. And I think that's cool because even Jesus didn't expect people to believe who he was without demonstration of power. And we need to also back that up. We need to back up our words. We need to back up our words with our love, with our actions, with our demonstrations of power. All right, so Jesus says, am I not doing the beautiful works my Father sent me to do? So they're enraged, mostly because he did it on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to work on a Sabbath. And they said, well, I think that if you made someone's eyes, like you healed someone, that counts as work, therefore you are wrong. It's just twisted. They start accusing him of being demon-possessed, which they all seem very familiar with in that culture. Okay, so they obviously saw demons manifest quite frequently because it was easier for them to believe that Jesus was manifesting demons than it was for them to believe that he was from the Father. Okay, so they surround him, and they're not joking. They're not just giving him a bit of a hard time about healing someone. They're going to kill him. So they pick up their stones and they're ready to kill him. And then it says that Jesus miraculously escaped. So we're really not sure why. I wish the Bible, I wish they just wrote more. Because did he paralyze everybody and then just sneak away? Did he stop time? Did he transport, just disappear in front of them? We don't know, but he's just one guy. And they're all surrounding him, ready to kill him. Okay? So think on that one for a while. Now he leaves the area of Judea, and this is where things escalate with Lazarus. So Lazarus gets really sick, and he sends a messenger to Jesus. And he's so sick that he's probably going to die. So I do not have the scriptures up here, so you can just relax and listen, or you can follow along in your app or your Bible. In the village of Bethany, there was a man named Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha. Mary was the one who would anoint Jesus' feet with a costly perfume and dry his feet with her long hair. One day Lazarus became very sick to the point of death. So his sister sent a message to Jesus. Lord, our brother Lazarus, the one you love, is very sick. Please come. When he heard this, he said, this sickness will not end in death for Lazarus, but will bring glory and praise to God. This will reveal the greatness of the Son of God by what takes place. Now, even though Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he remained where he was for 2 more days. Finally, on the 3rd day, he said to his disciples, come, it's time to go to Bethany. But teacher, they said, do you really want to go back there? It's just a short time ago that the people of Judea were going to stone you. So the disciples aren't fans of going back to the place he just miraculously escaped from, where they were ready to kill him. They're not joking, Jesus. They want you dead. And Jesus replied, are there not 12 hours of daylight in every day? You can go through a day without the fear of stumbling when you walk in the one who gives light to the world. But you will stumble when the light is not in you, for you will be walking in the dark. Then Jesus added, Lazarus, our friend, has just fallen asleep. It's time I go and awaken him. When they heard this, the disciples replied, Lord, if he's just fallen asleep, then he'll get better. Now, as the disciples, sometimes we kind of probably roll our eyes at them. They were like, you're so dense. But Jesus talked in riddles all the time, and I feel like they were just legit confused a lot of the time. Okay, so they're like, well, if he's just sleeping, he'll be fine. And Jesus is like, no. Jesus was speaking about Lazarus' death, but the disciples presumed he was talking about natural sleep. Then Jesus made it plain to them, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there, because now you have another opportunity to see who I am, so that you will learn to trust in me. Come, let's go and see him. So Thomas, nicknamed the twin, remarked to the other disciples, let's go so that we can die with him. So he's sarcastic. He's not like a martyr saying, let's go die with Jesus. He's just like, oh my gosh, fine, I guess let's go. And we're going to die. Okay, so when I look at the part of Jesus, it's like Lazarus whom he loved, and Jesus stayed where he was for 2 days. I've never liked that part of the Bible, and I've always just kind of skipped over it, leave it for another day. This time I decided to dig into it a little bit more, because I just feel like it's a little bit out of character for Jesus. Often what you'll find is that people will say, well, he let Jesus die, or he let Lazarus die so that God could be glorified. And I was kind of like, I don't know. I want to be clear on that, because I don't want to create theology out of something I'm just surface reading. Okay? So, if you do a little digging into the timeline, scholars agree that wherever Jesus was about 1 day's travel from where Lazarus was. So that meant that when the messengers would have taken a day to get to Jesus with the message. Later, we'll see in the story that when Jesus gets there, Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Okay? So that means that 1 day for the message to get to Jesus dilly-dallies for 2 days, and then 1 day to get to Lazarus. So 4 days. So by the time the message even got to Jesus, Lazarus had already passed away. Okay? And might seem like a minute detail, but it was important to me. And Jesus it shows that he actually knows that prophetically, because we don't see anything else about another messenger coming. But Jesus says, well, he's dead. Let's go awaken him. So Jesus knew that he had died. Okay? So, that was interesting. All right, let's look at verse 17 to 19. Now, when they arrived at Bethany, which was only about 2 miles from Jerusalem, now remember, it is only 2 miles, but they had to walk, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Many friends of Mary and Martha had come from the region to console them over the loss of their brother. We're going to go further than that. And when Martha heard that Jesus was approaching the village, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, my Lord, if only he would come sooner, my brother would not have died. But I know that if you were to ask God for anything, he would do it for you. So we have two responses when Jesus comes. We have Martha, who comes out to meet him and is a little bit passive-aggressive in her comment. Like, if you were here, you could have stopped this. Why weren't you here? Right? Because that's the question I would be asking. And we have Mary, who's not even interested in coming out to meet Jesus at this point. She's in the house. She's grieving, understandably so. We could possibly imagine that she's fairly completely devastated. She's despondent. She's in despair. She's depressed. Okay, and both of those, I think, are very understandable reactions given what just happened. But what we don't see here is hope. We have Jesus, who has come. They have seen Jesus perform countless miracles. And Jesus comes, and there's no hope. And so I think that what Jesus wants to come out of this is that there's always hope. So Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise and live." She replied, "Yes, I know he will rise with everyone else on resurrection day." "Martha," Jesus says, "you don't have to wait until then. I am the resurrection, and I am life eternal. Anyone who clings to me in faith, even though he dies, will live forever. And the one who lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Then Martha replied, "Yes, Lord, I do. I've always believed that you are the Anointed One, the Son of God, who has come into the world for us." Okay, so then Mary does come out to meet Jesus eventually because Jesus asks for her. He sends Martha back to say, can you ask Mary to come out here? And Mary has the same question. "Lord, if you would have been here, he wouldn't have died." Okay, so then we get to verse 38. Or actually, we'll start in 34. He said to them, "Where did you bury him?" "Lord, come with us and we'll show you," they replied. Then tears streamed down Jesus' face. Seeing Jesus weep caused many of the mourners to say, "Look how much he loved Lazarus." Yet others said, "Isn't this the one who opens blind eyes? Why didn't he do anything to keep Lazarus from dying?" Then Jesus, with intense emotions, came to the tomb, a cave with a stone placed over its entrance, and Jesus told them, "Roll away the stone." So he's gone through these conversations with the sisters, and there's still no expectation. They did say, "I believe God could do anything you asked him to do," but they're not expecting a whole lot right now. And so Jesus is upset, and he goes to the tomb, and he is grieving for his friend. He's grieving for what his sisters and Lazarus' friends are going through. And he says, "Roll away the stone." And you would think that people who had just seen, they have seen Jesus raise two other people from the dead. One had just been on her deathbed. Okay? Another was being carried to his burial, but they had actually seen him raise the dead before. And so you would think that when Jesus says, "Roll away the stone," they'd be like, "Oh, goody. It's going to happen. This is what we've been waiting for." And is that what they say? No. Mary or Martha, I forget which one. Martha says, "No, don't do that. He has been dead for 4 days. The King James says he stinketh." Okay, it reeks. He is decomposing. This is not a good idea. Okay? Now, it reminds me, who's watched The Princess Bride? Okay? When Wesley is just mostly dead, right? He goes to the little man in the cabin, and they're like, "Oh, no, we can do something about this because he looks all the way dead, but he's just mostly dead." Okay? We can do something about mostly dead. Not all the way dead. Jesus can do something about all the way dead. Okay? He can do something about it. Do you have situations in your life that feel that way? All the way dead? Completely hopeless? Because I know a guy. I know a guy who's in the business of overcoming death, of overcoming hopelessness. Up in verse 11, Jesus tells the disciples that Lazarus is only sleeping, that he will awaken him. And the disciples take him literally, but he's like, "No, he's dead." It's interesting that he uses euphemisms. I'm always curious why he uses euphemisms when he could just say it straight. And it made me wonder, at times, do you think the language that Jesus uses reveals his perspective of him and the Father? Because even though the situation is beyond hopeless in the eyes of man, and it just is, we cannot raise the dead. Okay? But in the eyes of the Father, it's no worse than sleeping, because he has the power to wake him up. And it reminded me of the word I felt God gave me to give last Sunday, that there's no crises in the kingdom. Nothing takes him by surprise. There is nothing that comes up and he's like, oh, did not see that coming. What are we going to do? I think it's at the end of King of My Heart where Stephanie Gresslinger is doing some spontaneous worship and she's singing, he doesn't fall off of his throne. And it's true, he doesn't fall off of his throne. So nothing takes him off guard. We could be completely consumed with worry, but he's not concerned about it. Now, have you ever had a child completely lose their mind about something that has a simple solution? If you have not, I invite you to Devon's gym classes, okay? Because middle years phys ed, it happens at least 12 times in every class. They will lose their minds over things that have a very simple solution. I had children screaming at me because I didn't see the ball tag the back of someone's heel, okay? So, also during this week, we had a helium balloon in our house go missing. Now, you would have thought that someone's best friend had moved away forever by the reaction. Like, there was weeping and there was moaning and there was gnashing of teeth about this helium balloon. And she had brought it into our room while I was renovating. The door was open a lot, so it probably just escaped to freedom. And so as she's just freaking out, Dean and I are like, if you could just get a hold of yourself for a minute, we can tell you the solution. And this is like on the bed and there's kicking and screaming and it's just the worst day ever. And we're just like, look, we will search the house because you've been putting the balloon to sleep a lot. So it's probably under a blanket. Okay? But if not, here's the other solution. We got backup plans. We will drive to the Dollar Tree and we will spend $1.25 and you can have a new balloon. Voila, all fixed. And you know, I just say that because I've thrown some pretty epic meltdowns in my day. And I feel like God is saying the same thing to me. If you could just get a hold of yourself for a second, I will tell you the solution. Be still. I got this. And Jesus has got this situation. He says to her, didn't I say if you believed, you would see God unveil his power? Note the word unveil there because it's something that hasn't been seen before. All right, we're going to read verses 40 to 47. So he said, roll away the stone. Then Martha said, but Lord, it's been 4 days since he died. By now his body is already decomposing. Then the part about unveil the power. So they rolled away the heavy stone. Jesus gazed into heaven and said, Father, thank you that you have heard my prayer, for you listen to every word I speak. Now, so that these who stand here with me will believe that you have sent me to earth as your messenger, I will use the power you have given me. Then with a loud voice, Jesus shouted with authority, Lazarus, come out of that tomb. Then in front of everyone, Lazarus, who had died 4 days earlier, slowly hobbled out. He still had grave clothes tightly wrapped around his hands and feet and covering his face. Jesus said to them, unwrap him and let him loose. From that day forward, many of those who had come to visit Mary believed in him, for they had seen with their own eyes this amazing miracle. But a few went back to inform tattle to the Pharisees about what Jesus had done. And the result of that meeting was, we need to kill him some more. Okay, so we've seen now Lazarus raised back to life, and it shattered the ceiling of their beliefs. They had put limitations on God, on Jesus, and he just shattered that. And they would need to have experienced this if they were going to have any hope when they saw him hanging from a cross. The Jewish leaders and the high priests are enraged. Again, how would they stop people from believing in Jesus now? How would they control the people? What do you think it does to a group of people to see a man triumph over death? To see someone who has authority over death? It decimates fear. There was a play written in 1925 by Eugene O'Neill called Lazarus Laughs. And it explores what happens or what could have happened after Lazarus comes back to life and has zero fear. And the more I read about it, it's actually written as a Greek tragedy, so everybody dies and Lazarus laughs. So it might be depressing to read, but I liked this quote. There is no death, really. There's only life. There is only God. There's only incredible joy. The grave is as empty as a doorway is empty. The grave is just like a doorway. It's just where you walk through to get from one life to the next life. There's only life. So can you imagine a Lazarus who comes back from that and he's just like, what are you going to do to me? It's even better over there. He's not worried about going back because the Pharisees are also plotting to kill him as well because they're like, we need to get rid of this testimony. We need to shut it down. So we have leaders who are used to control and intimidation that aren't going to accept a fearless people. So this cinches the deal, and everything just snowballs from now on until the crucifixion. Okay? Now I want to go back a little bit, and I want to take it down another path because I want to look at how it applies to us. And if we look at John 10, verse 10, probably my favorite verse, it says, "The thief comes to steal, slaughter, and destroy. But I have come to give you everything in abundance, more than you expect, life in its fullness until you overflow." So we've been given access to this life in abundance. But the sad reality is we don't always live in abundance in all areas of our lives. And I think there's a lot of truth in this passage that can be translated into what it looks like for us to walk into abundance. The first thing Jesus says is, roll away the stone. And I see the stone as an obstacle. Even a live Lazarus wouldn't have been able to walk through a massive stone. So what are the things in our lives that are in some way, shape, or form blocking us from freedom? Blocking us from encountering Jesus in certain areas? Because we have to get them out of the way. We've got to take a good look and we need to start addressing some of those blockages. You know, for some it might be toxic relationships and you need to have some healthy boundaries. For some it might be you numb your pain through video games and television. And those things aren't bad in and of themselves at all. But as humans, I'm just picking like 2 examples because as humans we're masters of numbing our pain, right? We are masters of distracting ourselves. And we need to start looking at our lives and rolling some stones out of the way. Next, Jesus calls out, Lazarus, come out of that tomb. Here's the thing. If Jesus can call a person out of death, he surely can call you out of any situation you're in right now. Okay? He's calling you out. You don't have to wait for the dean, come out of the tomb. He's already calling you out. You've got to grab hold of the hope that he is, not the hope that he offers sometimes or gives out occasionally, but the hope that he is, because he is victory, and you have got to take him at his word, and you have to believe all the things that he says in here about you, because it is for freedom that he has set you free. You are a child of God. You are a co-heir with Christ. He came to give you, yes, you, life in abundance. Now, I would say that if it is not abundant, don't settle for it. And that seems selfish sometimes in our natural minds, but this is kingdom reality we're talking about. He says, no, I came to give you life in abundance in every area of your life till you're overflowing. We should be walking around like geysers, okay? Old Faithful, overflowing all the time. So not just like a geyser, more like a fountain. But, okay? Now, here's another cool part, is that when Lazarus is raised from the dead, he comes stumbling out. He's not leaping and prancing and like, I am alive. Okay, we expect to hear butterflies and music, and he's like a zombie. He's coming out, and he's like, I can't walk. Okay? He is alive, but he's bound by grave clothes. And Jesus commands the crowd, unbind him. Now, how many of us are walking around like spiritual mummies in certain areas of our lives? Okay, we have encountered Jesus. We have experienced his love and his salvation. We've been made new creations in Christ. We have come alive spiritually, but in all this new life, we still find ourselves bound in certain areas. Because I know that's me. I know there's areas where I'm bound. And I love that Jesus involved Lazarus' friends in the unbinding. He could have done it. He could have walked up there, started unraveling him because Jesus is already the star of the show. He's doing it all. But he doesn't. He invites the people in and he says, you, unbind them. He invited people to co-labor with him. You know, and when I was preparing for this, I had a sudden moment of clarity about something that I've known for a certain degree for a long time. But when I read this verse over and over and over again, I just pinged in me that for me personally, one of my major life's work or one of my major paths in life is this co-laboring of unbinding. When I read that verse, it makes my heart race because I love it. It's my desire to walk with people and to help take part in unraveling and seeing people free. It's such a privilege, and he calls us all to that. Here's the thing, though, about unbinding, is it's messy. Lazarus' body had started to decay. It smelled terrible. And lots of times in our lives, we smell pretty terrible. Okay? Our lives can look disastrously messy. And more often than not, I think we don't want to expose other people. We don't want to bring that mess into someone else's life. And then there's part of us that doesn't want to expose ourselves to other people because we don't want to feel embarrassed or ashamed of the mess that our life is. But sometimes we need help. As followers of Christ, we need to understand that God invites us into this process. This abundant life that he's called us to is not just for us. And it's like the blood bank slogan. It's in you to give. Okay? This abundant life that he promised you is in you to give. And so I firmly believe that anything that you have walked through and that you have been bound in and had victory over through Christ, God is equipping you to lead others to freedom. You will be a tool to bring others into that abundant life. And it's kind of like that poetic justice. It's kingdom justice. It's like at the end of a movie when the good guy gets the last laugh. That's how this is, because whatever the enemy has meant to destroy you, you are going to overcome it, and then you're going to go out and you're going to lead 100 more people into freedom. And the devil is going to be like, dang it, that backfired. Okay? Sometimes it's going to take getting vulnerable, allowing people to see our own messes. Very recently, I called a friend while I was hyperventilating crying. Like, I wasn't just teary. I was like, couldn't breathe. And I didn't just call, I FaceTimed. And it wasn't because I thought this is a fun opportunity for a conversation. It was and I didn't want people to see me like that. My hair was still in a towel from washing it. I had no makeup on. My whole face was swollen. And again, hyperventilating. But I know from experience that I will get through it quicker and often better if I involve people. And so I hit the FaceTime call and hit it again because they didn't answer right away. And I was like a horrifying mess to look at as soon as she answered the phone. And I was coherent enough to squeak out, I just need someone to sit with me while I cry. And so I did that for 10 minutes before we even started processing and talking. You know, and I did get through it. I got perspective, and I got freedom. So it's okay to invite people into your mess. They can always say no if they don't feel like they can handle it right then. Now, one of the things I find that binds us in our new life with Christ a lot are old lies. Lies have a way of completely distorting our view of reality. So, in grade 12, our girls' team made it to volleyball provincials just up the road here in Yellowgrass. And I might note that I'm from northern Saskatchewan. I didn't really know anything existed below Regina. But here we are. Okay, so the night before opening ceremonies, we're like hyper. We're all in hotel rooms. We're goofing off. We're excited about playing. We went to bed way too late, as athletes. We were like sleeping by 1 maybe, okay? Now, as was our custom, we decided to be fancy, and we wouldn't rely on an alarm clock to wake us up. We called down to front desk for a wake-up call. I have not done that in probably 20 years, but who used to do that? Like call down for the wake-up call because it feels so fancy. Okay. So we called down. We asked for a 6 a.m. wake-up call because we had to be at the gym by at least 8:30. And so we fell asleep, and way too soon we get the wake-up call. And we're exhausted, and we were like, oh my gosh, we really should have gone to bed far earlier. So we slowly roll out of bed, and we start getting ready for the day. We're getting our bags packed, knee pads put away, gym clothes on, eating breakfast. One person jumps in the shower, the other person's washing her hair in the sink because we're very efficient that way. And about 15 to 20 minutes into getting ready for the day, one of us noticed that the clock was wrong. It said 3:20 a.m. And we were like, well, that's weird. Let's reset the clock. So we grab an Indiglo Timex watch and go to reset the clock, and that one says 3:20 a.m. too. And we're like, oh. So there's no cell phones in these days, so we're like, how do we find out the real time? Because we're thinking someone snuck in and set all of our watches to prank us. And so we turn on the TV and we're watching the news. 3:20 a.m. And we're like, oh my gosh, but we're still we think everything's funny in grade 12. So we're laughing because we're mad because it's 3:20 a.m. and we've only been sleeping for 2 hours. But we're like, okay, we have to go tell the people showering that it's 3:20 a.m. So we go in there and we're laughing though. So we're like, it's 3:20, get out of the shower. We're going back to bed. They're like, we don't believe you. And we're like, no, for real. It's 3 a.m. They're like, nope, they refused. They would not believe us. And I don't blame them because we were doubled over laughing at the situation. So we're not being very convincing. So we're like, okay, well, a couple people go back to bed, shut off the lights, and the people showering are like, maybe they are serious, or they're really committed to this prank. I and another girl go out into the hallway, and I'm listening on doors of our teammates. And every time I hear voices, we knock, and they're like, what's going on? Is it 3 a.m? And our whole team was awake. Entire team. So then Miss Justice in me marches down to the front desk at 3 a.m, and I am like, why did you call us at 3 a.m. for our wake-up call? And they're like, we swear it was not us. And I'm like, well, you better fix this. So I'm like, somebody is pranking us, and you better shut off the phones. So they have shut off now all room-to-room calling. We are not allowed to call each other's room because now obviously some other team has pranked us, and it's going to have detrimental effects on our playing. So finally, the people get out of the shower, and they actually finally believe us, and we all try to go back to bed, but we still think it's kind of funny, so we're laughing. I don't even know when we fell asleep, but then the 6 o'clock for real came. We were zombies. We could not function. We played the worst in that first game than we had ever played in our entire volleyball career. And so it sucked. Now, on the way home, we're at a restaurant, and our coach stands up to give the provincial way to try speech, because we did not do well in the entire tournament. And right before she sits down, and she's like, oh, by the way, that was me who called you. I thought it would be funny. So our coach sabotaged us. She did not think that we would all get up and start getting ready for the day. She thought we'd look at the clock and be like, that's dumb, go back to sleep. But no, she totally backfired on her. And so, we're a little outraged, a little amused, and 20 years later, it reminds me how a lie can totally affect our perception of reality, because we were convinced that it was 6 a.m. and that we should be getting ready for the day. And so a lie can have much more devastating effects than sucking at your first game of volleyball. Okay? I was renovating recently, and I felt like the Lord started to give me a picture that really spoke to me, and I called it the parable of the Splinter, because I was renovating, I was faux shiplapping everything, and they used a rough saw to cut my strips, and I just got slivers constantly. But lies are like slivers. So they enter during a moment of pain or trauma, and they hurt a lot. They hurt like 1,000,000 times more than they should, based on the size. It's ridiculous the amount of pain that a little millimeter-sized piece of wood in your finger can induce. Do you feel me on that? Like, splinters hurt. Okay, digging around and trying to remove a splinter is not fun. The entry site is raw, it's painful, it's tender. But if we can get that splinter out right away, it heals very quickly and it's like nothing ever happened. But if we don't, it's a whole other story, and it's the same with lies. Sometimes they go deep and we can't get them out immediately. Or we just can't get to them. Or it hurts too much to get to them. But the body in its natural peaceful state is going to recognize foreign matter and it's going to react. It gets inflamed around that site. And so it is with lies. Pain isn't really our enemy. It's just a signal that something isn't right. But sometimes we get really offended with our pain or the pain in others. When we've believed a lie, our soul and spirit know that something isn't right. And we often feel very tender in that area that we have that lie. So I had a splinter right there in the tip of my finger, and just the lightest brush against it caused pain to shoot through my finger. So you're also in constant pain, which makes you irritable. Have you ever been that way? Where you're in constant pain or you're in constant inner pain, and that just makes you irritable towards people? Okay. Now, when a lie is flaring up, it doesn't take much to trigger that pain either. Just the slightest nudge, the slightest little poke at that tender area, and you're going to overreact. So for me, that's a really good indicator of when I have a lie, is because if something happens and I react here, when it calls for a reaction at about here, I know I have a lie. So if a friend cancels last minute, it's natural to be a little bit disappointed. Okay? But when you react here, nobody loves me and nobody values my time and I am not worth loving, therefore, that's an overreaction to that lie because of that lie. Okay? So, what happens if you leave a splinter for a while? Does it just like dig in there, get cozy, it heals over fine, and it's good to go? It festers. Okay? The body says you can't stay here. We're going to push you up and out. That doesn't always feel good. I left that sliver overnight because I had already butchered my finger trying to dig it out with a needle, and I couldn't get it out. So I left it for a day knowing the way my body works. It'll push it out. So in 24 hours, I could see the tip of it and I could yank it out and it was done. Hurt for a little while, was still a bit raw and tender, but that's how lies are. Your soul and your spirit are going to say, nope, you can't stay here. They're going to push it up and out. It's not going to feel so good. But here's the good news. When a lie surfaces is when it's the easiest to pluck it out. Things are going to feel really real. Everything, you're just going to be feeling all the things. Okay? But it's easy then to identify the lie and pluck it out because you don't have to dig. It's already there and you can just go plink and replace it with truth. So often we stuff down the pain and we just want to bury it. But as long as it's there, it's going to impair function. When I had that, it was literally a millimeter sliver in my finger. I couldn't use my finger. So here I am renovating, holding boards up like this for days because it hurt my finger too much. It was completely out of commission. And then when we allow lies to fester in us, they put us out of commission in certain areas. So if we can understand our pain as a signal, we can possibly start to face it better and be intentional to just maybe keep an eye out for those splinters and pluck them out. And I think this is a really fascinating part of unbinding. I think it's a beautiful tool in the set that God gives us to help us on our individually get free and to help others get free. Because sometimes you can't pinpoint the lie. Okay? But if you have a friend who hears it and they're like, that's not true. God's not mad at you. Okay? You are worth loving. Okay? When someone can point out the truth and you're like, well, no, this is my experience. Experience is a very good teacher to us, right? But it takes other people sometimes to be like, not true, man. Not true. And so we want to think of that for ourselves, and we want to think of how we can do that for others. Not in like lie detector police, where we run around like Oprah, and that's a lie, and that's a lie, and that's a lie. But we want to be sensitive. We want to walk with people. And you want to be a sounding board a lot of times. So that when you hear something not truth, you don't just go, maybe it's true for them. You go, no, not truth. This is who you are. John 8:32 says, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We can't have freedom without truth. We have to be people that go after truth. So just like Jesus called to the crowd, unbind him, he's calling to us, unbind them. When we have the courage to walk towards abundance in our own lives, towards life and towards freedom, we're equipped to walk others towards those things. And we're equipped to help peel away the layers of the grave clothes.